Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Precision Digital's Introduction to the new Consolidator Plus. In this webinar today, we're going to talk about this new Consolidator Plus product line, and we're going to see how you use it for display and control an alarm, primarily with multiple 4 to 20 milliamp inputs or pulse signals. And to be clear, those 4 to 20 milliamps in pulses could be coming from just about any transmitter or flow meter you may have. So whether you're big into flow, level, temperature, or pressure, this is going to be applicable to you here today. First, I have a couple of bookkeeping items. If you are hearing me, and I would like to know that my audio is working, just do me a favor and let me know by typing it into the chat box in the lower left corner. We did a check earlier, but I just want to confirm now that we've got everybody here. Second, and I see some positive comments coming through, so thank you very much, everyone, for that. So it sounds like everyone's hearing me okay. The most common question I get during these webinars is, can we get access to the slides, or is this going to be recorded? And the answer to that, both of those, is yes. There'll be an email that goes out probably next Wednesday, which will have a recording of today's webinar as well as a link to where you can download the PDF slides. Now, I mentioned I get questions. As you may have noticed, you are all in listen-only mode. There's just too many people on the line here today for us to have this many open phone lines. With everyone's coughing and dog barking, you wouldn't be able to hear anything that was going on. So if you have questions as we go throughout the webinar, I ask that you type them into the chat box that you probably have in the lower left of your screen. If you do that, I'm going to pause in the middle of the webinar and near the end, and we'll take some of those questions. If we don't get to your questions, know that we will follow up with you next week and see if we can answer them for you then. Finally, there's a survey that you may see when our webinar has concluded. It's only a few questions, and I'd greatly appreciate it if you would fill that out. It'll take a minute of your time, but it'll let us know how we're doing and what you might like to see in future Precision Digital webinars. So with that, let's go ahead and get started and see what we're going to talk about today. So first, we're going to look at this new Consolidator Plus, its key features, functionality, and pricing. Then talk about the types of inputs and outputs you can have, its communication protocols, and see how that all literally comes together in the hardware itself. Then we're going to look at an in-depth application involving some Sumps, as well as talk about a few other places you may see the Consolidator Plus, and review its accessories, setup, and calibration services. Lastly, before we get going, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Joe Ryan, the VP of Sales and Marketing for Precision Digital. And with that, I've got a question for you. What is your industry? Are you one of Precision Digital's industrial distributors, or are you an end user from a specific industry? Now, if you go ahead and click Other here, as I see a few of you already have, I'd greatly appreciate if you'd go ahead and type that into your chat box, just to know if there's something I should be adding here for the future. And based on the results, I can see that you are mostly industrial distributors, so we'll certainly keep that in mind as we go through the presentation. But for those of you who have clicked something else and are end users attending, don't worry, it's only a couple of slides we may add. You're going to benefit a lot from today's presentation as well. I'd like to start this presentation with a thank you to Precision Digital's engineers that really spearheaded this project. This was an in-house design. This is a Precision Digital product through and through. And Oro, James, and Jose, who you see here, and who I think some of you may have talked to in the past, were really the ones responsible for driving this product line. We're really thrilled with the way it came out. We think you will be too. And so we want to make sure we give them a big thanks for the effort that they put in over the last few years developing this product from scratch. So what is this product? What is the Consolidator Plus? Well, let's take a look, shall we? These are the key features that will give you a good idea of what this product is all about. You see it as a NEMA 4X panel or field mount product, meaning that it can go into a cutout in a cabinet or a panel and have that NEMA 4X seal on the front. But it's also available in a field mount, which means that it comes with its own box for mounting outdoors or without any other kind of cabinet. We have some good pictures of that later that you'll see. In fact, you can't quite see the box because this is a head-on view, but you can see this hinge here and this latch here. But let me know that this is actually the field mount version we're looking at. It's just so dead on you Can't quite tell. You can have a numeric or bar graph color display. Now over here on the left, we have just the numeric version of it right now. You can see that because we've got the feet and inches being displayed in the Sumps and there are no bar graphs. However, there's a bar graph version of it as well, and in a few slides, we're going to see some of those slides in detail, so you'll see what I'm talking about when I mention bar graphs. 20 screens with up to 8 PVs each. So let's start with talking about what is a PV. Well, PV stands for a process variable. And so in this case, height of the Sumps is a process variable. So that could be the height of a sump, the height of a tank, the flow going through a flow meter, a temperature from a temperature transmitter, a pressure, you name it. It's really any variable that you're measuring with a transmitter or flow meter. And when we say 20 screens, we're talking about one of these. That is one screen. It's a custom configurable screen with the data that I choose to display on it. So in this case, I'm showing 4 sumps, sump 1, sump 2, sump 3, sump 4, and I can change that to have bar graphs or not, have 1 PV or have 8 PVs. And so you can have 20 screens you can scroll through or have automatically scroll, and each one of those can have up to 8 PVs. We have isolated 4 to 20 milliamp inputs. That's a big deal. As I'll repeat later, every input on the consolidator has its own 24-volt isolated power supply and is itself isolated. So anyone who's worked with non-isolated systems can, I'm sure, relate to the fact that having everything on this isolated from everything else is a big advantage for the wiring and setup. Its inputs and outputs have a modular design. That makes field upgrades very easy to do, and it means the product can be very flexible in terms of how many I/O you want. We've got isolated 24-volt transmitter power supplies for the analog inputs. See, every time you put a transmitter in the field, you've got to answer the question, how am I going to power it? They're almost all 24-volt powered, either loop powered or 3 or 4 wire. Well, how am I going to do that? Well, the consolidator solves that for you for every transmitter because it gives you an isolated 24-volt power supply, whereas the consolidator itself can be powered from high voltage or low voltage. So if you've just got 120 out there in the field, no problem. It's going to give you a 24-volt power supply for every transmitter loop, and itself can be powered, the Consolidator Plus, from 120 volts DC, or 24 if that's what you have handy, and then you still get a bunch of 24-volt out. It's got RS-45 and Ethernet capabilities for Modbus RTU on the 485 and TCP/IP on the Ethernet. And this is Precision Digital's first product with Ethernet, so we're very happy to be rolling that out. We have math functions. If you want to go a little more complicated than just, say, showing the levels in sumps, you can do addition, subtraction, ratios, division, multiplication, percentages, you name it. And you can actually string those together through multiple math functions to make more complicated functions for your specific applications. I see in the list of folks who are attending here, we do have some of you from northern climates and up in Canada. So it's very worth pointing out this is a minus 40 degrees C operating temperature product. And I mean it will operate at minus 40. So you will see the display will update, all the I/O will work just fine down to minus 40. If you're not doing level or pressure or temperature and you're doing flow instead, well, you probably want to have rate total and grand total capability, which you do. And you can even have all those on one screen. You know, in that case, the rate, the total, and the grand total are all just different PVs that I can display on the screen, however I configure it. Though mostly used in level, we do multi-pump alternation control, or simple on-off control if you're in some other application where you just want to have something turn on at a certain level and turn off at another level. One of the great things about the Consolidator Plus is that it makes a great pump controller because you have that multi-pump alternation control. You can build a screen for every individual level that you're monitoring, and it can show you as we'll see in a bit, it will show you the number of pump cycles, the time, etc. We offer free Consolidator Plus configuration software on the website. Though you do get to program this with English language prompts, I recommend everyone uses the software just because it sure makes it a lot easier to type it on your keyboard than to punch it in on the 5 push buttons we've got on the front. And lastly, there's a 3-year warranty on this product, which shows you the level of quality that we put into it. Those of you familiar with our previous brand of Consolidator product know it had a 1-year warranty on it, so now that we're offering you a 3 on this ground-up redesign, it shows you that this is really something that we think is a pretty bulletproof product. So let's talk a little bit about the part numbers and the pricing. A consolidator can be configured with pulse inputs, 4 to 20 milliamp inputs, 4 to 20 milliamp outputs, and relays. Some combination of those 4 I/O. And the part numbers all reflect that. So for example, this basic one you see listed first is a PD9000-GP-4AI. That 4AI lets you know we're talking about 4 analog inputs. So if you extrapolate from there, right, you look at our most populated version, all the way down here at the bottom, you've got the GP-8PI, 8AI, 10AO, 5RY. What does that all mean? Well, it means it's got it means it has 8 pulse inputs and 8 analog inputs and 10 analog outputs and 5 relays. So you really can't pick a consolidator that is configured for your application. And if we don't have your application here, we can do custom configurations of I/O, although there is a small price adder. This P in the part number means that it is a panel mount. So note that if you want the field mount, you're just going to add a small adder to that. So you can look at any consolidator part number and get a sense of what the I/O are, and you can build the part numbers pretty easily. Now, you don't actually have to do that. You can go to predig.com, our website, and we have a configurator on the Consolidator Plus product page. But at least when you look at the part number, you're going to get a sense of what you get. Prices start at around $2,000, and you can build one that's close to $5,000, just over. So there's a wide range of prices on this product, all depending on what you want it to do. I mentioned screens earlier, so let's talk about that. So this represents what we're calling here the main screen. There isn't truly a main screen, but if I've built the application out as we're going to see it here, that's what I would call this one. So what we've got here is a screen name that every screen gets, and you pick that. And in this case, we're calling it tanks 1 through 8 because, surprise, I'm displaying tanks 1 through 8. Now on here, I've chosen to display bar graphs for up to 8 PVs, so I've got 1 through 8 for my bar graphs. And you'll note that each one of those PVs gets a bar graph. And then it has the reference for the channel name, its units, and its actual numeric value. Something I'll point out while I'm over here in the numeric value area is that we have commas available there, which make reading big numbers very easy. You can sort of see it if you look, for example, at tanks 7 and 8. I've got commas off on one and commas on the other. And the one with commas is just much easier to read. That becomes even more so when you're talking about flow rates and totals. If I've got a grand total up in the millions, having those commas there just make it easy to read at a glance. And I'm not counting over how many digits. I'm not going to confuse 10,000 with 1 million. I've got these colored markers on each of my bar graphs, and those represent the fact that I have alarms there. So for example, this yellow line here is going to tell me when my channel is going to go into an alarm state. So as my PV comes up, it's going to trigger that yellow line and it's going to go into alarm. And then you're going to get something like this one you see over here on channel 4. And that shows me the point at which my alarm was triggered and the point at which it's going to reset. So that's what that little tail is. It's letting me know when I get to the bottom of that tail, my alarm's going to go off. So looking at this one screen, I've got a lot of information available to me. I've got my PV and units, my channel tag and number. I've got up to 8 PVs being shown here. It's being shown on a nice white backlit screen with a color 5.7-inch screen. So I can actually see all these numbers even though I've got so much information packed on it. It's also worth noting that screen is sunlight readable. So you can read this in direct sunlight outdoors, which is great because that NEMA 4X front we talked about means it's awesome for outdoor applications. And lastly, I'll point out these buttons at the bottom. So these are soft keys. You have the 5 push buttons that display or that are fixed underneath this mechanically. And the buttons that are on the front mechanically correspond to whatever is displayed on the screen here. So we've got one button set up to be menu. I've got a left and a right arrow to scroll through my different screens. I can turn my automatic screen scanning or scrolling on and off, or I can acknowledge all my alarms. Those soft keys are also configurable on each screen. So if I decide on other screens, as I will and I'll show you in the next slide, I want other buttons, I can do that. So here are some other screens I might find helpful. And so I constructed them to have other PVs and display other information. I've given a channel detail screen for each one of my screens. So here we see the one for channel 1. It's channel 1, its name is tank 1. Again, I've got my units and my process variable being displayed. I've got the same bar graph from the front, or from my main screen, so I can see both my alarm point and my level. In this case, I can see the alarm is on, it just hasn't reached that reset point yet. But I've added some additional information onto this screen, such as the actual milliamp input and the milliamp value of it. So I can see if this analog input's coming in on the first card in the second slot, or the second input. That's just what I chose to name it in this case. And I've got my milliamp value that I'm displaying. Now I'm using a timer and an alarm on this as well. Obviously I have an alarm because you can see it over here, A1. It's telling me that my set point's 7,000, my reset's 4,000, and that it's currently on. I can even see with the timer how long that has been on for. Another screen I might choose to build is if I were doing pump control on each one of these tanks. Actually, I built this one up for the sumps that we saw in the earlier example. So here we have sump 1. Got my alarm point being displayed in the bar graph and my level. I'm using a feet and inches display here, so I don't just have some number of gallons or 3,022 feet. I actually show it with the feet and inches indicator so everybody just easily understands what it is when they look at it. Then I've got my 2 alarms, which I actually call pump 1 and pump 2, and have cycling for alternation. And so you can see how long each one has been on for, as well as how many cycles it's cycled for, and what their current state is. So that's a lot of pump information available on this pump control screen. Another nice feature is I can set my alarms to have names and text that are essentially whatever I want. So I don't have something down here that just says, oh, it's alarm 4 and it's off. No, I programmed it so that instead of that, I'm calling it sump level 1 OK. And instead of a on off, I get a yes or a no. So somebody doesn't have to know what that alarm is or what it's going to trigger at or if it matters at all. We're telling you if the sump level is all right or not. That's what we're doing with that alarm. You'll notice, by the way, also on each of these, I did change the soft keys. So I've got the ability to reset different relays, acknowledge alarms, go back in this case because if I get to this duplex pump controller screen, I want to be able to go back to my sump main menu. So it really is a customizable display. And if you're doing flow rate in total, you might have a display like the one you see here on the right, where we're counting effluent rates in total, or seeing effluent rate in total. I've got my flow rate, my flow total, which I've named the channels, my units in gallons per minute and gallons. And because I've only got 2 things being shown on the screen, it automatically resizes it to be nice big digits. So I can say I get 62.86 gallons per minute. And here's where those commas come in really handy. I've got just over 1 million gallons. If you take the commas out, especially if you add a decimal place, you won't know what this is when you stare at it. You'll have to be counting digits. Now that we have a sense of what the display itself looks like, let's look at the Consolidator Plus a little bigger picture. So on the right, you'll see the panel mount version. There's a nice shallow depth behind the panel here. You can see that on this angled view, the back of the case just barely pokes out. Again, it's a NEMA 4X installation. So if you're putting it in a control cabinet, putting it into any kind of a control room panel, really anywhere outside or where it might get washed down, you're going to be just fine. And we have a pretty big extra bezel area here because we give you a nice forgiving panel cut. So you don't have to have your panel custom machined by a machine shop and take the door off and ship it in. You can do this yourselves with the tools you have. And so long as you're relatively accurate, I'd say within 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch, you're going to have no problem maintaining that NEMA 4X seal. On the left, you've got the field mount version of it. And so now you can see it comes in that box. Here's that hinge I was talking about earlier, and there's the latch on the side, which can be tool secured. So you can put an actual padlock on there. You can put a zip tie. You can put a lead seal. anything you really want, there's a loop there that'll lock that latch closed for you. And we really did some nice features to this box. It's not just a standard box. One, you can see that the product is really integrated into it. This is a custom enclosure that we designed for this product, and it really integrates into the Consolidator Plus. It's very deep. You can see it's much deeper than the actual depth of the Consolidator itself, because we want you to be able to put other equipment in this. And you might be able to see here this flat area in the back that comes with 4 starter holes, and there's one of those on each side of the box. So you've got a nice area that's perfectly flat for you to bring your conduit up against and maintain your NEMA 4 seals, and we give you starter holes, so it's very easy to drill that conduit hole. And you get that on all the sides of the box. Finally, here up on the top and the bottom, we've got these mounting flanges. And mounting flanges give you through holes so that you can mount it to a board or a rail. But we also give you slots for pipe mounting. If you want to mount it to a 2-inch pipe, 2.5-inch pipe, 1.5-inch pipe, that's pretty easy to do because we offer you a slot. All you need is the U-bolt. And we actually offer a 2-inch pipe mounting kit, as you'll see in a moment. So this is a pretty smart designed package. And if you have the opportunity to work with this, I think you're going to be pretty happy with how easily it all goes together inside your panels or out in the field. But if we look inside for a minute, you're going to see some other nice features. So we talk about the I/O of this product, the inputs, outputs, relays, and we say things like up to 28 420 milliamp isolated inputs, or 28 pulse inputs, or up to 25 10 amp Form C relays with 8 analog or pulse inputs, or up to 25 isolated 420 milliamp outputs with 8 analog or pulse inputs. And why do we throw the numbers around? Why do we balance them like with terms up to and in these specific configurations? Well, when we open up the field unit here, like we did on the right, you can see why. There's 2 parts on the back of the Consolidator Plus. This is sort of your standard onboard equipment on the right here. And then on your left, everything to the left of this little dash line, you have I/O card slots. So for example, that's a card slot, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And each one of these slots can be filled with an I/O card that's either got 4 pulse or analog inputs or 5 analog outputs and relays. And so you can understand now why if I put 28 420 milliamp isolated inputs in this, well, I can get 4 on each channel. And so if I put 4 isolated inputs and I've got 7 slots, that's how I'm going to get up to my 28. If I take some of those slots and I use them for relays, to put 25 10 amp relays in there, well, that's going to be 5 of my slots used up for relays, which leaves me with 2 slots for my analog inputs, which would give me a total of 8. The nice part about this is it's how you get all the different configurations available for the product as far as what I/O can have. And it also means that if you're not totally utilizing the Consolidator Plus, you can field upgrade it later. If I were only using, say, these top 4 slots, and then all of a sudden I realized I wanted some relays, well, I could buy a couple of relay cards. I'd take out these screws around the case, so there'd be a little bit of work to do. But then I just slot in my new relay card. And the Consolidator, with a little bit of button pushing, will recognize those relay cards, change its own internal part number, and it'll be just like it's shipped like that from the factory. In fact, even if you add analog inputs or outputs, we calibrate these cards separately. So every card is calibrated from the factory, and you can just slot new analog inputs into your Consolidator Plus. Now, on the right, you're going to see that there are 5 digital inputs standard. There's 4 digital outputs. The RS-485 for Modbus slave communication is standard, although you can also get it with Ethernet port, which is not standard but optional. And you also get this micro USB connection, and that's what's used for the configuration software. I'm willing to bet all of you have a micro USB cable. Heck, you may have it within arm's reach. It's what most of us use to charge our phones. You also see that there are 2 power connections. We separate them so you don't get them confused. You've got your low voltage DC power and your higher voltage AC power. So if you've got 120 volts AC, no problem. It can be powered from that. If you've got 24 volts DC, no problem. It can be powered from that. And regardless of which power supply you use, it doesn't affect all those isolated inputs, outputs, and power supplies over at the I/O side. So let me talk a little bit about those isolated transmitter power supplies and why they're so helpful to have. So the main reason to have them is to power the transmitter. It's something you have to solve when you're putting these applications together. The Consolidator is here to help you solve that problem. It's to eliminate the need of having a whole bunch of isolated power supplies for the system. And every 4 to 20 milliamp input has its own isolated 24-volt DC power supply to power up the transmitter. So in a simple case where you have a 2-wire 4 to 20 milliamp transmitter, all you have to do is just directly wire your milliamp plus and your plus 24-volt pin through your 2-wire transmitter, and you're done. It powers the loop. It brings in the signal. Everything's isolated from all your other channels. Easy. And the Consolidator Plus can provide up to 1,600 milliamps worth of current at 24 volts, which means you could have 8 inputs and you could still have 200 milliamps per input. Now, you don't need that 200 milliamps per input for a 2-wire transmitter, but you may have a 3 or 4-wire transmitter, something that requires power in addition to just the 4 to 20 loop. And that may require a very small amount of current, maybe 40 milliamps, or there are certainly ones that could require 150 milliamps. And so the Consolidator Plus's power supplies can provide up to 200 milliamps per individual channel and up to 1,600 milliamps total, so that it can be your power supply. Now, if you've got a maximum number of inputs, right, so you're using all 28 inputs, you're only going to be able to get about 50 milliamps per channel because it's going to be limited by that 1,600 milliamp total. But it's also worth noting that even if you have something like a real power-hungry gas detection unit that needs 500 milliamps to run, well, you'll need a few extra inputs, but we can gang up those 24-volt supplies and get you up to that 500 milliamps by wiring 3 of the 24-volt supplies together. So when you get the Consolidator Plus, most likely it is going to be your power supply solution. We also power the output loop with an isolated power supply. And that's going to make it just as easy to send that 4 to 20 signal somewhere else. So let's say I was using this as a pulse to analog converter. I'm bringing in pulse inputs, but then I want to provide analog outputs. Well, if I want to see that somewhere else, say in the control room or another place in the field, and I want to put a chart recorder or a loop powered meter, some other location, I just connect my 2 wires, and I've got a powered 4 to 20 out coming from my Consolidator. Now, for communications options, we've got 3 of them. So we've got that Ethernet option for Modbus TCP/IP. That allows your Consolidator Plus to be connected to a local area network. But really, you can also connect to it from anywhere. Now, I will say, if you're going to connect to it from anywhere, if I want to go from, say, my house to Precision Digital Headquarters, well, I can do that. I can read it from my home via Modbus TCP/IP, but I will have to get my IT guys involved. Once you're no longer on the local area network, you're going to have questions like, what ports are you using, and how do you map it through your routers, and you're going to want to involve the IT department of the place in that kind of a decision. But if you're going around in the local network, it's a very easy system to set up. I've got my micro USB, just for the configuration software, and we've got Modbus RS-485 communications, which not only let it be a way to get Modbus into your system. So, for example, you're bringing in those analog inputs or those pulse inputs, and then you're connecting to it with a Modbus master back in the control room and pulling out those values. You can do that, but another way you can use it is as a display for the master in the control room. So let's say you already have all this information in your Modbus system. Well, you can have your control room setup, be it your PLC or software package, write the data to the Consolidator and wants the Consolidator to display out in the field. Now, before we go on and talk a little bit about the software and such, let me just pause here for a minute and field a couple of questions that I see coming in. First, Jason has asked, is there a resettable totalizer? And the answer to that is absolutely. You've got the ability to have a total and a grand total, and one or both can be set up to be resettable or not resettable. Very often what I'll see is someone will have the total resettable, and they'll want to reset that at the beginning of the shift or after they run a batch of something, but then they'll leave the grand total as non-resettable or have it reset a different way. And that's why you essentially have the two totals, right? So you can absolutely reset your totalizers. Now, I also have a question from Bill about the power supply on the output. And he says, I see in the drawing that we are powering the 4 to 20 milliamp output. Can something else power the 4 to 20 milliamp output like a PLC? And so I think what you're getting at is, in this example here, what we're showing is the consolidator powering the output, right? So we have the two wires going into this, in this case, a loop-powered indicator, which means that we're using the consolidator's power supply. However, if I were going back to the control room and bringing that 4 to 20 milliamp signal into, say, a PLC, well, that PLC might have a power supply of its own that it uses for its inputs. And if that were the case, I'd just slightly wire this differently, and I could be using the PLC's onboard power supply. So to put it another way, that analog output from the consolidator could be a passive or an active output, all depending on how you wire it up. And so either way, you're going to be fine. If you need it to solve your power supply solution for how you're going to get that output loop to run, it will certainly do that. If you've got that solved with other pieces of equipment, well, that's perfectly fine too. I also have a question from John who asks, is the NEMA 4X rating on it something that allows it to go into a classified area? And the answer to that is definitely no. The NEMA 4X rating is just used for weather protection, essentially. It lets you know that it's waterproof, and it lets you know it's corrosion resistant. You need a different kind of approval if you're going to go into, say, a Class 1 Div 2 area. Now, I think eventually we'll see that approval, so keep your eyes peeled to your emails. Let's see what comes up later in the year. But right now, there are no hazardous area approvals on the consolidator. It's just got those weatherproof ratings like NEMA 4X. It's also, by the way, made with a UV-resistant plastic and such, so it really does do well outdoors. So with that, let me go back. We talked about our communications. Let me mention the software. So the Consolidator Plus programming software, again, is free to download off predig.com. And it allows you to do all of your configuration. You can configure inputs, outputs, alarms, timers, build your screens, set up your math functions, name everything, you name it. What's nice about it is that much like the consolidator itself, you see it in real English, right? You're not doing any programming here. This particular screenshot just happens to show what we have set up in the various slots and then creates a part number for itself. But if I were to go into any of these channel totalizer, alarm menus, I'd see the same screens I would on the consolidator. It's almost exactly what you'd see on the front, except now I can click around with my mouse and I can type things in with my keyboard, which is just a lot easier. And once again, it connects via that micro USB cable, so you don't need anything special in order to do that. A question I've got for you is, how familiar are you with the previous generation of our Consolidator products? Now, the Consolidator Plus is called the Consolidator Plus because it's the new and improved, redesigned from the ground up version of the Consolidator. But we were selling that Consolidator line, the 940, 941, 980, 981 products, for quite some time. And is that something that you're familiar with? And it looks like a number of you are somewhat familiar with it. Not a lot of experts out there, but people have seen it. Maybe they've used it before. It looks like we've got some familiarity. And so if you'll bear with us here for a moment, those 20% of you who have not heard of it before, I want to talk a little bit about how it compares to that old product you might be more familiar with. So on your right, you see the Consolidator 8 and the Consolidator 4. Those are the two versions of it because they had 8 or 4 inputs. And going down this list, it's just instantly clear why the Consolidator Plus is such a better product. I mean, first of all, you can just look at them, right? There was no field mount version of the Consolidator. There was a panel mount and a wall mount, and they clearly were not NEMA 4. I know I mentioned that earlier, but I mean, you can see the connectors sticking out the sides. Also, they had this sort of dreary-looking gray and black display. Well, now we've got a much better-looking, full-color backlit display, and you've got it in a solid NEMA 4 panel or field mount option. But diving into the specific makeup of the consolidator, you see we've got a lot more options for analog inputs and outputs. The old consolidators all just came with 4 pulse inputs. Well, now it really is a tool useful for flow meters because you can bring in up to 28 pulse inputs. And I say flow meters, by the way, but I mean really those could be coming from rotary encoders or any kind of pulse signal you're trying to read. We've got digital inputs and outputs now available. And if you want to use it as a slave field display using Modbus from your Modbus system, you've got a lot more opportunity to show different variables on here. The big one, though, is this power supply. That's the one when it comes to like the electrical ratings that I'm the most excited about. Because now we've got those isolated 24-volt power supplies for every input and analog out, every analog input and every analog output. Before, in the old consolidators, any of you who have used them probably realize that we had a 12-volt power supply in there, and it wasn't isolated from anything. It was basically one supply on the whole meter. And so when you're trying to bring in that case, 8 analog inputs and have a couple of analog outputs with one power supply, it can cause you some problems. Well, now that everything is isolated from everything, it's much easier to wire. You don't have to worry about ground loops. There's no shared common issues if you're trying to send those signals retransmitted back to a PLC. It's a lot easier to work with. The old consolidator only had 9 relays. Now you can get up to 25. We can do pump alternation control, a big request that the old consolidator wasn't able to fulfill. We've got that color sunlight readable LCD on there. We talked about the NEMA 4X mounting options. You've got RS-485 now rather than 232, which is a much better protocol to work with, and it can be set up for multi-drop easier. And we've got that Ethernet option. We've got that -40 degree to 60 degrees C rating on temperature. Great for you folks up north. And you can see the quality of the product improve because we now offer our standard Precision Digital 3-year warranty on this. So anyone who's seen or used that old Consolidator 4 or 8, this is just a vast improvement, and I think you'll be real happy working with it. Many of you are our industrial distributors, so as a side note, if you have customers who have that old Consolidator 4 or 8, get out there and show them the new Consolidator Plus. It's a significant improvement, and it may be upgrade time for them. Some of the accessories we've got available for the Consolidator, again, based around its new packaging. So we've got a mounting plate that lets you put other equipment installed behind the Consolidator 8. You can put your DIN rails in there, power supplies, fuses, whatever. I suppose you won't need power supplies, of course. Some people do like to put terminal blocks, make the wiring easier, fuses, other equipment. We've got a sun hood. This is a sunlight readable product. However, there are going to be locations when you're out in West Texas or up in the plains where at certain times of day that sun is practically horizontal. And anything with sort of a glass front to it and a display is going to be really hard to read just because the glare gets too brutal. And so if it's in a position where you're really worried about glare, it's not just a matter of brightness and the sun being overhead, well, then you can get the sun hood for it. I notice we've got a nice big scoop on the front of it. And that really does prevent any kind of glare from happening because at almost any angle, the sun can't hit that display dead on. The only one it would be if it was right in front of it. Well, you're standing there trying to read the thing. So that's not a concern. So if you really are worried about glare and you want it to be super easy to read, you get a sun hood for it. We have lights and horns now available for a variety of our products, but they are perfect for the Consolidator Plus. If you want to have a red, green, yellow, blue light on the top of this, maybe even a multicolor light, you certainly can. It's got an audible horn, so if any of those alarms go off, you can hear it, get someone's attention. And it's really easy to mount it in that NEMA 4X box. And finally, I mentioned that we had the mounting slots for pipe mounting, and so that's what it looks like when it's pipe mounted. And we offer the U-bolt kits, if you don't already have U-bolts to use, so that you can mount it onto your 2-inch pipe. It's just a couple stainless steel U-bolts and some nuts. If you know what you want your consolidator to be set up for, we offer setup services. You can talk to us about it, and we'll program it at the factory for you. So when we ship it out, all you got to do is wire it up, turn it on, and let it do its job. Similarly, if your customers want to see the calibrations of the unit, or if your plant requires that you have calibration certificates available, Well, we do offer calibration certificates. We offer one without data on it. It just says, hey, it was calibrated to specs, or we actually show you the data if you want a larger report. And we base that pricing based on the number of I/O. And so that's why you see you've got 12, 24, 36 inputs and outputs. Obviously, from our end, it's just a lot easier for us to go through the calibration process for something with, say, 8 analog inputs than it is something with 28 analog inputs. Talking for a moment about some applications now, where you might see the consolidator used. Well, tank height measurement is probably the #1 application where it gets used. It certainly does a lot more than just that, but there are a lot of tanks out there. And in general, level is Precision Digital's #1 application, so that's not a big surprise for us. Similarly, sump level monitoring, literally like the inverse of tanks, is another big application, especially in large plants that have lots of sumps. If you're doing those level monitoring applications, well, pump alternation control to control your level with multiple pumps is a great feature to have. We've had it in our panel meters for some time now, and we're glad that it's finally made its way over into the Consolidator Plus. With the Consolidator Plus, of course, you also get the ability to show all those different variables related to pump control. You got flow meter, rate, and total. You can bring it in either from the pulse output or from the analog output of the flow meter. Or if you're doing open channel flow using a level transmitter for your flow rates, that's great too. And our math functions make it very easy to bring in that signal and do the signal conditioning needed to get a nice linear display at the level. And we've mentioned that you can use it for Modbus PV displays, taking those inputs from a consolidator master and controller. So now that we've talked at length about what the consolidator can do, let's really see what I might want to do with it. So let's take a deeper look at that sump application we saw the display for earlier. In this case, we're controlling multiple sumps. You can see I've got the sumps down below here, and so I've got 6 sumps, and each sump has 6 transmitters on it. Every sump's going to have a high alarm and a low alarm, which hopefully I'll never hit. But I've got this pump on and pump off level for when I want my pumps to turn on and off. But I don't just want one pump. I'm going to put 2 pumps in these because I can't afford to have them fail. And so I've got every 4 to 20 milliamp input coming into the consolidator from a transmitter has its own power supply. And so it's going to power up that 2-wire transmitter and bring the signal back. So I don't need any external power supplies for that. And then I've got 25 relays in this, which means for every sump, so let's take a look at sump 1's control outputs. I've got 4 relays for each one of my 6 sumps. 1 relay to be the primary pump, 1 relay to control the backup pump. It's pump alternation, so there really is no primary backup, but it's the terminology people tend to use. And then I've got a relay for my high alarm and my low alarm. And I've got those 4 relays set up for each of my 6 sumps. Now that's only 24 relays. I've got 25, so my last relay is going to be used if any of my alarms go off. If any of my alarms go off from any of those sumps, I want to have an alarm that goes out to a central monitoring station. Could be an auto dialer, could be a light and horn. And so I use my 25th relay as a general alarm relay for in case any alarm anywhere has happened. And so all I need to do now is power up this consolidator, which I could do from 120 volts. I could do it from 24 volts. And I bring in my power connections into this, and it does all the rest of the control for these 6 sumps. And it does it by using 6 4 to 20 milliamp inputs with 6 isolated power supplies and 25 output relays. In fact, I can even configure the screens like we saw earlier. So I've got my general sump 1 through 6 display screen on the front right now showing me bar graphs and feet and inches for each one of the sumps. But then I've got a more detailed screen that shows me larger numbers for my sumps. In this case, sumps 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then a second screen would show me 5 and 6. And I've got pump control screens for each sump, showing me the pump status for each, how many times it's cycled, and how long it's been on. So now I can use that to help with my maintenance on the pumps. So in this case, we've got what is really a great 6-sump pump controller doing everything from one unit. Just an example to give you an idea of what kinds of things you can do with this new Consolidator Plus. So as we look to wrap up, what are some things that you should remember leaving the webinar? Well, the Consolidator Plus is my opportunity to display multiple inputs on one screen. Someone wants to see all the levels of their tanks, all the levels of their sumps with bar graphs or with just numbers, great, think Consolidator. All of the inputs on it are isolated. You've got relay and 4 to 20 milliamp outputs available, whether it's one, the other, or some mix, which you can use for control or retransmit. Your level applications, keep in mind you got pump alternation control available on the Consolidator Plus. It's got the big advantage of being your power supply solution. It solves how you're going to power all your transmitters. And it is Precision Digital's first product with Ethernet, Modbus, TCP/IP. So if you run into people looking to do Ethernet communications via Modbus, well, this is the product for you. Now, many of you were distributors, so I will take one slide just to mention our new Consolidator Plus actual size poster. This is a great tool for talking with your customers. It shows you an actual size image of the Consolidator that we saw here, so they can really get a sense of its size and how easy it is to read that display. Shows you all the key features we talked about, as well as the sample screens that we saw here. And on the back of the Consolidator poster is all sorts of interesting information you'd find normally on the website. So you've got the list of part numbers that we talked about earlier, the description we saw on the slides of how the isolated inputs and power supplies work together. You've got pictures of the accessories and such. Basically, this webinar is on the back of this poster. And so it's a great opportunity for you to just, on your way out the door, oh, hey, I got one more thing to show you, pull out your poster, open it up, and start a conversation. After you talk with your transmitter, your customer about the transmitters you're going to sell them, talk to them about how you're going to power them, and see that information. If any of you think that this would be great to show around to your best transmitter customers, go ahead and let me know, either by emailing me, calling me, or just typing it into your chat box here. In fact, heck, you could put it into the survey I'm going to ask you to fill out in a minute, too. So my last question for you is, should we contact you or your office for additional training? Are you a distributor who thinks that it would be great for either you or maybe even your whole team to learn more about this Consolidator? Or maybe you're an end user who thinks that either you or some of the rest of the operations folks there could really use a hands-on tutorial in it because you think you've got an opportunity and it might be able to help you. If so, just go ahead and click here, and we'll be happy to get in touch next week and talk about when we can get this in front of you in person. With that, I've just got a couple of questions then to wrap up here. Cliff would like to know if this unit will handle encoder inputs, and that's going to depend. You know, it's a good question, Cliff. I think I'll probably be in touch with you afterwards. If it's like a rotary encoder and if you're literally just sending pulses out to it, then yes, it should be able to handle that. We'll just probably want to talk about how you're going to display that and scale those pulses. If you're talking about an encoder that has multiple sort of digital outputs from it, so to speak, you know, different close contacts that change states as something rotates, that one might be a little more tricky. So encoder is a great question. I'd urge you to talk to us about it. Of course, you're here, so we'll reach out to you next week and discuss it. I also have a question here from Joe asking, can the Ethernet option be added after purchase, like the I/O? Unfortunately, the Ethernet option cannot be added after purchase. That's sort of a standard or a main feature that needs to be built into the product itself. So that's not something that's as easily upgradable as the various I/O cards are. Great question, though. Unfortunately, you just can't do that with the Ethernet. And lastly, David had asked, do the light and horns allow the box to retain the NEMA 4X rating? And the answer to that one is they do. The light and horn is also rated for weatherproofness. And so long as it's installed appropriately, then that shouldn't be a problem. And they are pretty easy to install. I mean, it's got a little gasket in it and nut. You drill a hole. It's not difficult. Oh, and I do have one other question that's coming in here, and it's about the Consolidator Plus poster. Is the Consolidator Plus, this is one of our distributors, asking if the Consolidator Plus poster is going to be included with our solutions guide. Right now, they are not. The solutions guide is essentially the Precision Digital catalog. It shows you different applications that people can use. but we are including it with shipments. So it's a separate document, but if we ship you out solutions guides, and if you'd like more solutions guides to show to your customers, we are shipping out Consolidator Plus posters with it. So request the solutions guide, you will automatically get the Consolidator Plus poster. Excuse me. All right, well, I thank you all for attending today. I hope that it was well worth your time and that you like the look of the new Consolidator Plus. I think it's got a lot of great potential for everyone here to make the lives of your customers or yourselves much better by improving your ability to see your processes and control them all from one device. If you'd like to learn more, you have questions or I didn't get to your question, please feel free to reach out to us. I've got our general sales line phone number here. Got our sales email as well, and we'll make sure that we get back to you. You'll get an email next week containing a recording of this webinar as well as the slides. And I'll close by reminding you there is a survey at the end of this webinar. I would really appreciate it if you take a moment to fill that out. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time, and I hope all of you have a great weekend coming up. Thank you.